Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Religion. In the structured forms hitherto considered, which are distinguished in general as consciousness, self-consciousness, reason, and spirit, religion too, as consciousness of absolute being as such, has indeed made its appearance, although only from the standpoint of the consciousness that is conscious of absolute being. But absolute being in and for itself, the self-consciousness of spirit, has not appeared in those shapes. Even consciousness, insofar as it is the understanding, is consciousness of the supersensible or the inner side of objective existence, but the supersensible, the eternal, or whatever else it may be called, is devoid of self. It is only to begin with the universal, which is a long way yet from being spirit, that knows itself as spirit. Then there was the self-consciousness that reached its final shape in the unhappy consciousness. That was only the pain of the spirit that wrestled, but without success, to reach out into objectivity. The unity of the individual self-consciousness and its changeless essence, to which the former attains, remains therefore a beyond for self-consciousness. The immediate existence of reason, which for us issued from that pain, and its peculiar shapes, have no religion, because the self-consciousness of them knows or seeks itself in the immediate present. On the other hand, in the ethical world we did see a religion, namely the religion of the underworld. It is the belief in the terrible unknown night of fate and in the Eumenides of the departed spirit. The former is pure negativity, in the form of universality. The latter the same negativity in the form of individuality. Absolute being is, in the latter form, indeed the self and present. Since other than present the self cannot be, but the individual self is this individual shade, which has separated from itself the universality which fate is. True, it is a shade, a superseded particular self, and thus a universal self, but the negative significance of the shade has still not changed round into the positive significance of the universal self, and therefore the superseded self still has at the same time the immediate significance of this particular and essence-less being. But fate, devoid of self, remains the unconscious night, which does not attain to an imminent differentiation, nor to the clarity of self-knowledge. This belief in the nothingness of necessity and in the underworld becomes belief in heaven, because the departed self must unite with its universality, must explicate in this universality what it contains, and thus become clear to itself. This kingdom of faith, however, we saw unfold its content only in the element of thought, without the concrete notion, and for that reason perish in its fate, namely in the religion of the Enlightenment. In this religion, the supersensible beyond of the understanding is reinstated, but in such a way that self-consciousness remains satisfied in this world, and the supersensible empty beyond, which is neither to be known nor feared, it knows neither as a self nor as a power. In the religion of morality, the fact that absolute being is a positive content is at last again recognized, but the content is bound up with the negativity of the Enlightenment. It is a being that is at the same time taken back into the self, in which it remains shut up, and a differentiated content whose parts are just as immediately negated as they are produced. The fate, however, which engulfs this contradictory movement is the self which is conscious of itself as the fate of what is essential and actual. Religion always makes me think of Druidesses, but I don't know if Hegel mentioned anything about them. Must be the Celtic blood in me. The self-knowing spirit is, in religion, immediately its own pure self-consciousness. These forms of it which have been considered, namely the true spirit, the self-alienated spirit, and the spirit that is certain of itself, together constitute spirit in its consciousness which, confronting its world, does not recognize itself therein. But in conscience it brings itself, as well as its objective world in general, into subjection, as always its picture thinking and its specific notion, and is now a self-consciousness that communes with its own self. In this, spirit conceived as object has for itself the significance of being the universal spirit that contains within itself all essence and all actuality. Yet it is not in the form of free actuality or the apparent independence of nature. True, it has shape or the form of being, in that it is the object of its consciousness, but because in religion, consciousness is posited essentially in the determination of self-consciousness, the shape is perfectly transparent to itself, and the reality it contains is shut up in it and superseded in it, just the same way as when we speak of all reality, it is universal reality as thought. Since then, in religion, the determination of the consciousness proper of spirit does not have the form of the free otherness. Spirit's existence is distinct from its self-consciousness, and its reality proper falls outside of religion. There is indeed one spirit of both, but its consciousness does not embrace both together, and religion appears as a part of existence, of conduct and activity, whose other part is the life lived in its real world, as we now know the spirit in its own world and spirit conscious of itself as spirit, or spirit in religion, are the same. The perfection of religion consists in the two becoming identical with each other, not only that religion concerns itself with spirit's reality, but conversely that spirit as self-conscious spirit becomes actual to itself and object of its consciousness. So far as spirit in religion pictures itself to itself, it is indeed consciousness, and the reality enclosed within religion is the shape and the guise of its picture thinking. But in this picture thinking, reality does not receive its perfect due, namely to be not merely a guise, but an independent free existence, and conversely, because it lacks perfection within itself, it is a specific shape which does not attain to what it ought to show forth, namely spirit that is conscious of itself. If its shape is to express spirit itself, it must be nothing else than spirit, and spirit must appear to itself or be in actuality what it is in its essence. Only by so doing would that also be obtained which may seem to be the demand for the opposite, namely, that the object of its consciousness have at the same time the form of free actuality, but only spirit that is object to itself as absolute spirit is conscious of itself as a free actuality to the extent that it is and remains conscious of itself therein. When self-consciousness and consciousness proper, religion and spirit in its world, or spirit's existence, are in the first instance distinguished from each other, the latter consists in the totality of spirit so far as its moments exhibit themselves in separation, each on its own account. But the moments are consciousness, self-consciousness, reason, and spirit. Spirit, that is, as immediate spirit, which is not yet consciousness of spirit. Their totality taken together constitutes spirit in its mundane existence, and generally, spirit as such contains the previous structured shapes in universal determinations in the moments just named. Religion presupposes that these have run their full course, and is their simple totality or absolute self. The course traversed by these moments is, moreover, in relation to religion, not to be represented as occurring in time. Only the totality of spirit is in time, and the shapes, which are the shapes of the totality of spirit, display themselves in a temporal succession, for only the whole has true actuality, and therefore the form of pure freedom in face of another, a form which expresses itself as time. But the moment of the whole consciousness, self-consciousness, reason and spirit, just because they are moments, have no existence in separation from one another. Just as spirit was distinguished from its moments, so we have further, in the third place, to distinguish from these moments themselves their individual determination. We saw this, that each of those moments was differentiated, again in its own self, into a process of its own, and assumed different shapes, as, for example, in consciousness, sense certainty and perception were distinct from each other. These latter shapes fall apart in time and belong to a particular totality, for spirit descends from its universality to individuality through determination. The determination, or middle term, is consciousness, self-consciousness, and so on. But individuality is constituted by the shapes assumed by these moments, and these therefore exhibit spirit in its individuality or actuality, and are distinguished from one another in time, though in such a way that the later moment retains within it the preceding one. If, therefore, religion is the perfection of spirit, into which its individual moments, consciousness, self-consciousness, reason and spirit, return and have returned as into their ground, they together constitute the existent actuality of the totality of spirit, which is only as a differentiating and self-returning movement of these its aspects. The genesis of religion in general is contained in the movement of the universal moments, but since each of these attributes was exhibited, not merely as it determines itself in general, but as it is in and for itself, that is, as it runs its course as a totality within itself, therefore, what has come to be is not merely the genesis of religion in general, those complete processes of the individual aspects, at the same time contain the specific form of religion itself, the totality of spirit. The spirit of religion is again the movement away from its immediacy towards the attainment of the knowledge of what is in itself, or immediately, the movement in which finally the shape in which it appears for its consciousness will be perfectly identical with its essence, and it will behold itself as it is. In this genesis of religion, spirit itself, therefore, assumes specific shapes, which constitute the different moments of this movement at the same time. The specific religion has likewise a specific actual spirit. Thus, if consciousness, self-consciousness, reason and spirit belong to self-knowing spirit in general, similarly, these specific shapes, which were specially developed within consciousness, self-consciousness, reason and spirit, belong to the specific shapes of self-knowing spirit. From the shapes belonging to each of its moments, the specific shape of religion picks out the one appropriate to it for its actual spirit, the one distinctive feature which characterizes the religion, penetrates every aspect of its actual existence, and stamps them with this common character. In this way, the arrangement of the shapes which have hitherto appeared differs from the way they appeared in their own order. On this point we shall observe briefly, at the start, what is necessary. In the series we considered each moment, exploring its own depths, formed itself into a totality within its own peculiar principle, and cognition was the depth or the spirit wherein the moments which have no other subsistence of their own possess their substance. But this substance is now manifest. It is the depth of spirit that is certain of itself, which does not allow the principle of each individual moment to become isolated and to make itself a totality within itself. On the contrary, gathering and holding together all these moments within itself, it advances within this total wealth of its actual spirit, and all its particular moments take and receive in common into themselves the like determinateness of the whole. The self, a certain spirit, and its movement is their true actuality, and the being in and for self which belongs to each moment. Thus, while the previous single series in its advance mark the retrogressive steps in it by nodes, but continued itself again to form them in a single line. It is now, as it were, broken at these nodes, at these universal moments, and falls apart into many lines, which gathered up into a single bundle, at the same time combined symmetrically, so that the similar differences in which each particular moment took shape within itself meet together. Odelan Redon Druides. However, it is self-evident from the whole exposition how this coordination of the general directions here represented is to be understood, so that it is superfluous to remark that these differences are to be grasped essentially only as moments of the development, not as parts. In actual spirit they are attributes of its substance, but in religion, on the other hand, they are only predicates of the subject. Similarly, all forms in general are certainly in themselves, or for us, contained in spirit, and in each spirit, but as regards spirit's actuality, the main point is solely which determinateness is explicit for it in its consciousness, in which determinateness it has expressed itself, its self, or in which shape it knows its essence. The distinction which was made between actual spirit and spirit that knows itself as spirit, or between itself qua consciousness and qua self-consciousness, is superseded in the spirit that knows itself in its truth. Its consciousness and its self-consciousness are on the same level. But as religion here is to begin with immediate, this distinction has not yet returned into spirit. What is posited is only the notion of religion. In this the essence is self-consciousness, which is conscious of being all truth and contains all reality within that truth. The self-consciousness has, as consciousness, itself object. Spirit, which to begin with has an immediate knowledge of itself, is thus to itself spirit in the form of immediacy, and the determinateness of the form in which it appears to itself is that of mere being. This being, it is true, is filled neither with sensation, nor manifold material, nor with any other kind of one-sided moments, purpose, and determinations. It is filled with spirit and is known by itself to be all truth and reality. Such filling is not identical with its shape. Spirit qua essence is not identical with its consciousness. Spirit is actual as absolute spirit only when it is also for itself in its truth, as it is in its certainty of itself, or when the extremes into which as consciousness it parts itself are explicitly for each other in the shape of spirit. The shape which spirit assumes as object of its consciousness remains filled by the certainty of spirit as by its substance. Through this content the object is saved from being degraded to pure objectivity, to the form of negativity of self-consciousness. Spirit's immediate unity with itself is the basis of or pure consciousness, within which consciousness parts asunder into the duality of subject and object. In this way, spirit, shut up within its pure self-consciousness, does not exist in religion as the creator of a nature in general. What it does create in this movement are its shapes qua spirits, which together constitute the completeness of its manifestation. And this movement itself is the genesis of a complete reality through its individual aspects or through its incomplete shapes. The first reality of spirit is the notion of religion itself, or religion as immediate, and therefore natural religion. In this, spirit knows itself as its object in a natural or immediate shape. The second reality, however, is necessarily that in which spirit knows itself in the shape of a superseded natural existence, or of the self. This, therefore, is the religion of art, for the shape raises itself to the form of the self through the creative activity of consciousness, whereby this beholds in its object its act of the self. Finally, the third reality overcomes the one-sidedness of the first two. The self is just as much an immediacy as the immediacy is the self. If in the first reality, spirit in general is in the form of consciousness, and in the second, in that of self-consciousness, in the third, it is in the form of the unity of both. It has the shape of being in and for itself, and when it is thus conceived as it is in and for itself, this is the revealed religion. But although in this a spirit has indeed attained its true shape, yet the shape itself and the picture thought are still the unvanquished aspect from which spirit must pass over into the notion, in order wholly to resolve therein the form of objectivity, in the notion which equally embraces within itself its own opposite. It is then that spirit has grasped the notion of itself, just as we now have first grasped it, and its shape or the element of its existence, being the notion, is spirit itself. It's sad looking through this. I wonder what she's thinking.